Sometimes we have to look back and remember in order to truly look ahead. Sometimes our experiences can help build our faith. In whom do you trust? The same yesterday, today, and forever? The past can predict the future when you trust in the unchanging character of God. You know, one of the problems we have in quote-unquote science is that we do things like look at global warming, and we use computer models to do that. And the computer models are not particularly accurate because they have an assumption that's made in the formula that they use in order to figure out how they're going to get where they're going. Right? So it's not really science in the traditional sense. It's predictive based on what some man put into a computer with an assumption of how things should be. When you trust in God, you're trusting in the one who's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Meaning it's not predictive what God is going to be in the future. It's known. Okay? So Habakkuk 3, and we're going to look at verses 13 through 16. I'm just going to go ahead and read those. Thou wentest forth for the salvation of thy people, even for salvation with thine anointed. Thou woundest the head out of the house of the wicked by discovering the foundation unto the neck. Selah. Thou didst strike through with staves the head of his villages. They came out as a whirlwind to scatter me. Their rejoicing was to devour the poor secretly. Thou didst walk through the sea with thine horses, through the heap of great waters. When I heard my belly tremble, my lips quivered at the voice, rottenness entered into my bones, and I trembled in myself that I might rest in the day of trouble. When he cometh up unto the people, he will invade them with his troops. And you say, what does all that mean? So, again, remember Habakkuk is looking back at previous things that God has done, looking forward a little bit at what he believes God is going to do based on the conversation they've been having. When can you think of the waters being heaped up? When he parted the Red Sea, right? That's what he's talking about. And, you know, he talks about the plagues that were put on their captors in order to change a heart, in order to change what the thinking was. So he's talking about these events that took place in the past. He's talking about some of the trials and some of the things that have, you know, the Chaldeans are going to come, and he's talking about some of the stuff that's going into the future, but primarily he's looking backwards. Okay? And as he looks back at this, he's saying, you know, look, he's already said, you know, you weren't mad at the rivers, you weren't mad at and what were you doing? Were you punishing people? No. You were bringing salvation. You know, think about what the children of Israel went through with the plagues. You could say, well, it made their captivity harder, because it did. You'll crank out more bricks, you'll do this, you'll do that, right? It made it harder, but the reality is it was being done for their freedom. It was being done for their salvation. And we need to remember that when God is moving, sometimes something may seem very difficult for us, but what's his purpose? We need to go back and look at what is God saying? What is God doing? What is God trying to bring across? And that's important in the day that we live today, with all the things that potentially are coming our way, is that we look, what is God doing? What is God's purpose? Well, isn't his purpose that none should perish? Isn't his purpose that he could bring about salvation to those that aren't saved? Are we going to get some fallout from some of those things? Sure. Of course we are. But it's for the divine purpose of bringing about salvation. And we can rest in his hand knowing that we're not going to be punished. We may be inconvenienced a little. But God has always made a way for his people. God has always had a way to put his hand of protection around his people for their ultimate well-being. And you can look at some of the worst things in history for Christians. And one of the worst, I in my mind, when I think about it, was when Nero was burning Christians at the stake. That's pretty bad. You could say, wow, that's pretty bad. And yet the stories they tell was that Nero was enraged because he would put these Christians on the stake and light them on fire, and they would sing. They would sing to God. He wanted them screaming in pain, and they were singing to God, which means what? Which means God was working on their behalf in trying to bring salvation through what the enemy meant for evil. Does that make sense? I got news for you. You can't sing if you're in agony. But you can sing if God's protecting you from the torment. Does that make sense? My cousin, many years ago, worked at the post office. And I've told this story before, but it's been a while. And he had tried to witness to someone, and they were just convinced that religion was just nonsense. And as he was working one day, his hand got caught and pulled into one of the machines. And it was just crushing down on his hand, and he couldn't get free. And he was in that position for some time, more than an hour. And they, came and they had to disassemble part of the machine to get his hand out of it and all that. And he was off work for a while because of that. When he came back to work, that gentleman that he had tried to witness to came to him and said, "You know what? That day I knew what you had was real, because you weren't crying out, you weren't cursing, you were just calm and softly praying." And he goes, "That's when I knew it was real." Was it inconvenient for him? Yes. But what was the purpose? The purpose was that someone could see Jesus. Someone could see God. What was real. Now, remember in Habakkuk 13 through 16, we're still dealing with poetic utterances. We're still dealing with the fact that we're speaking in prose, if you will, in poetic form. This is a song, a poetic piece that is to be put to music. It is a song. And so some of this, the verbiage as we go through, there's I read it in King James, so there's the King James issue, right? Those of us who don't do the these and thous too well. But then there's also the fact that he's talking in a poetic prose, okay? But he is still, when we look at this, he's still talking about what has happened in the past, the things that the children of Israel have been through. And just like Paul said to Timothy, remember, look back, remember what God has done, remember what's happened in your family, remember what's gone on. As we are looking at our future today, I want you to look back and remember what God has already done for you. Remember the miracles that have already happened. Remember the times when things seemed like they were awful, but suddenly it turned out that God was doing something good. Remember the times that you've prayed for someone's salvation that you just knew they were never going to get saved, only to find out that they did. Remember those things. Remember those things. Why? Well, when Paul said it to Timothy, he was talking about building up his faith. And that's what I'm telling you right now. We need to look back on those things in order to let our faith be built up. God has been with you through the storms. He's been with you as you walked through on dry land while the waters were heaped up on the sides. And don't forget what happened when they crossed. Because their pursuers that far outnumbered them, that were far more powerful militarily than they were, They didn't get the same free pass across the waters. They just got far enough across that they could be completely wiped out when the waters rolled back. Sometimes God takes us out into the water because he knows the enemy can't swim, right? That's exactly how it goes sometimes. We have to look at that. So how do we apply this rear view mirror to the windshield? Okay? That's what I want us to look at for a minute. How do we apply this rear view mirror to the windshield? And I can really sum it up in 2 words. The God. And then you can take and put what you need right after that. The God that healeth thee. The God that strengthens thee. The God that watches over me. The God that is my provider. The God that saves me. What do you need to go after the God? What are your needs today? Look at the past. What has he done for you already? Look at the past. What has he done for people that you've known? Look at the past. See what God has done. Look what the Lord has done. And see. See that he's good. See that his motive is our salvation, not our suffering. My father-in-law used to say, the angels will punish you, to my wife. And you can look at that and get a wrong perspective about God. God doesn't really punish you. Sometimes he lets you suffer the consequences of your decisions. But it's not so much that he's trying to punish you. If God wants to punish you, trust me, he could do it really well. But sometimes we just need to remember and recognize what goes on. He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. He's a rewarder of those that look to him for what they need, that look to him for their very life, right? Their salvation, and come to him with thanksgiving and with a heart full of praise and begin to offer praise up to him. Our past can show us the things that are available in our future. Why? Because it's the same God. He's not less capable. You know, as the calendar flips over, I find there's things I'm less capable of doing. You with me? You know? I used to run everywhere when I was a kid. I don't run anywhere. You know? You follow me with this? I used to write down all the things I got done during a day. Now I write all the things I have to do and sit and figure out how am I going to do more than 3 of those? You know? And that's a good day, right? You still with me? But God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It's not harder for him to heal you today than it was yesterday. It's not harder for him to provide for you today than it was yesterday. It's not harder for God to take care of you today than it was yesterday. And he's not only capable, he's willing. If we trust him. So looking to our future, we look to our future now. Again, there's many Bible passages that we could go to look to our future. But it's very clear that the Bible has said that in the end times there would be famine. There's been times in man's history when there's been famine. I would say that you, growing up in this time frame in America, have probably never experienced famine. you've probably never really experienced any kind of prolonged hunger. I mean, beyond, isn't it dinner time yet? That's that's kind of as far as it goes, generally speaking, right? I don't think you've really experienced that. And yet the Bible talks about a time when a bag of gold couldn't buy you bread. And people have, over the years, looked at that and kind of scoffed, well, look how much gold is, bread's plentiful, we have, modern science for how we farm, and, there's just no way this is going to be an issue at all. And yet, worldwide, we have things happening that could lead us to shortages and famine. Worldwide, we have things going on that could make food a lot more valuable than we're used to it being. We have things going on in our own state that are just counterproductive to getting supplies. Who would have thought a couple of years ago we would have had a shortage of toilet paper? Right? Are you serious? God, can you do one of those things where the roll just keeps rolling, but it doesn't get smaller? You know what I'm saying, right? A few years ago, you'd have laughed at that whole concept. Are you kidding? Right? There's people who are talking about going in and seeing store shelves that are much more empty than normal. The things that we're doing in California in particular with trucking, a lot harder to get stuff. I could ask Courtney about getting parts because I bet it's still not easy. Right? There's car manufacturers who are not selling new cars because they can't get parts to finish building them for a long time. I bet 4 years ago, if I'd have said, hey, how about I sell you a used pickup truck for $40,000, you'd have said, are you nuts? That's more than a new one. It's not anymore. I know right now where there's a 6-year-old pickup truck for sale for just $56,000. Just $56,000. Right? That's insane. And so what can a Christian do when times like this come? Because I don't think it's a question of if it's going to happen. It's just when. And probably sooner than I would like. Right? So what can I do? Well, I can remember what he did in the past. Recognize that I serve the same God today. And I can let my faith be built up, and I can rest assured that his purpose is not to see me suffer. You're just doing this to punish me, God. No, that's not it. You're doing this so that the lost might see the salvation of... In fact, you might be the example that leads someone else to Christ. How? Well, maybe you're not wringing your hands just yet. Maybe you're not cursing God, so to speak, just yet. Maybe you're able to trust in God. People say, well, I don't understand how did you get those supplies when no one else could? Yeah, godly favor. That's exactly right. Hey, I've never had manna, but I know the God who created it before can probably create it all over again. And I'm okay with that. And if you don't like manna, maybe you prefer quail. We won't talk about how they got there, but maybe you could bring quail. I had a cat that brought me some quail one time. Well, I mean, he could have just eaten it, but he brought it to me. Of course, I've had him bring me mice too, and I'm not really sure I want to eat any of those. So, but you understand what I'm saying? God is able, right? If we trust God, we don't really have to worry about what else. And you can say, well, we live in a different time than that. Well, I got news for you. If you walk out in the front yard and there's manna all over the ground, it doesn't matter what time you live in, it's still workable. By the same token, you can say, well, everything's based on money. I have to have money for this or money for that. Well, have you gone fishing lately? Because God can provide money from the mouth of a fish. That's exactly right. Who are you going to trust? Are you going to look at this in with fear, or are you going to look back at what God has already done, what God has already proven that he can do, and look to the future with that expectation that God's going to take care of things? Am I telling you not to be smart and wise and plan? No, I'm not telling you that at all. What I'm telling you is trust God. Talk to God. Ask God questions. He will answer them if you listen. We have to look back in order to move ahead sometimes. We don't want to get all, lost in, well, I remember way back when, but we want to be able to look at what God has already done to see what God is going to do. Why? Same God. Hasn't changed. Same purpose. Hasn't changed. He's still trying to take care of his people and win the lost. That's what's going on. I see great responses to God taking place. People coming to the altar. People getting right with God. That tells us of a time that is the end time. The rumors of wars tells us of a time that talks about the end time. The predictions of famine talk about an end time. The value of food versus money talks to us about an end time. I read something, someone said, if you really want to do well financially, invest in wheat. I don't know if I would follow that, but that's what they said, right? If you really want to do well financially, invest in wheat. Because if wheat becomes worth more than gold, you're going to do really well, all right? That's not even the point, is it? Because here's the thing. If everything goes south, having a bunch of money isn't necessarily going to help you at all. Your money may become worth near nothing or nothing. Or you may not be able to access it. How would you do without electricity? Well, I can't even go on the internet to Google what to do. Right? Guess what? You got one of these? That's got the answers in it. Not Google. It's the Bible. Yes, basic instructions before leaving Earth. That's the Bible. That's where we need to be. We need to be in God's Word. I'm not saying that to put, guilt, like you need to read 32 chapters a day. You need to be in God's Word. Why? Because it helps you understand God's character. That's part of the looking back. It helps you to see what God says about the future. That's part of looking forward. And it helps you to just get a closer relationship to God. And it helps you to learn to hear God's voice. And you can ask God questions. God, what are you saying at this time? God, what are you doing at this time? God, what is your plan? He will reveal those things to you in his time. But if our relationship is such that we're conversing with God, such that we're trusting in God, such that we are used to hearing from God, then come what may, I can go back to those two words, the God. the God that gives me wisdom, the God that gives me strength. Whatever it is I need, God says he'll provide. And so Habakkuk here in this song is recognizing, and I've embellished on his words here, but the reality is he is looking back at the past in order to encourage himself for what's ahead, and has put it to song. And we're almost done with this series. We just have a couple of verses literally to go, a couple of weeks literally to go before we finish this series up. But the whole purpose, again, has been to give us a pattern and an example of what the past has held and predicting what the future can hold, and giving us the ability to see our need to trust God. Above all else, we need to trust God. That's truly it. At the end of the day, that's it. We need to trust God. And so I would encourage you not to let fear have a place. And in fact, I would encourage you to seek God's peace. Right? Seek God's peace. Because peace that comes from God passes our understanding, surpasses our understanding. Why? Because it's not just being calm in the middle of a storm. Peace is powerful and it overcomes. Having God's peace is to overcome the fears that the world would try and place on you. Okay? And that's it for this week.